Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching this special presentation of Sansad TV Samvaad with your host Kriti Mishra. And joining us today for the conversation is a very special guest, Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, Mr. Suman Bery. Sir, welcome to Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's a privilege and a duty, in fact, because of the importance of Parliament for all of us.
Well, thank you so much, sir. Let's begin talking about the budget that was presented by Finance Minister. Now, from all sides, from most of the quarters, we are hearing that this was a very balancing act that the government did.
Yes.
One side, there was growth, capital expenditure. On the other side, the fiscal deficit was kept under check. Your opening thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. No, I think it was masterful. And I don't need for your audience to get into the mechanics of what must have had to be thought through in all of this. So let me give, as it were, my sense of the strategy behind the budget. And I will start from the fact that the first paragraph of the budget links this budget to the 25 years of Amrit Kal and the aspiration of the Prime Minister for all of India articulated from the ramparts of the Red Fort to aim for a Viksit Bharat by 2047. And the budget begins, and I think that's very important as framing, of what kind of society India wishes to be, aspires to be, and can be in 2047. And much of the, as it were, bones of the budget really sort of flow quite organically from that. So a big emphasis on inclusion in the opening paragraph, a big emphasis on financial stability, a big emphasis on skills and youth, a big emphasis on women. And these themes, in obviously greater detail, then find their expression in the budget. But you asked about what an economist, and I'm an economist, would call the macro architecture of the budget. Okay? And I think for that macro architecture, you really do have to start with the economic survey, which came the day before. And what did the economic survey say? The economic survey said that in a turbulent global environment, India still believed that it could aspire to, nothing is certain, aspire to 6.5% growth. And your viewership may or may not know how important 6.5% is. I can get into that, but 6.5% growth in the face of global headwinds.
That's right.
And explicitly, both in the economic survey and in the presentation, they took account of the fact that, in particular, exports may be slower because the world economy is slower. And so, an image might be that of the captain of a ship heading into a storm. And that is really what Honorable Finance Minister was attempting to do. There's a storm there, but we have to maintain the direction of travel. And this budget is the attempt to maintain the direction of travel for now so that we can reach the final destination of Viksit Bharat in 2047. Now, on the fiscal deficit, why is the fiscal deficit important? Why is announcing a trajectory for the fiscal deficit important? And how did it shape the budget? I think these are the issues that arise from your question. The fiscal deficit is important as a test of what economists call fiscal marksmanship, but most importantly of national credibility. And I say national credibility because actually the final target of 4.5% of GDP for for the union government, and we need to talk about the states a little bit later, goes beyond the life of this government. So, it is a commitment that what we call in NITI Aayog, Team India is committing to something. And the logic behind that, and there are some who've argued that it could be a bit more aggressive, is that if you accept what the economic survey starts with, which is that we've gotten over the pandemic, then it is time to start neutralizing and going back to creating what economists call buffers, fiscal buffers. And so there's no reason to delay. Okay, so we have this desire to tighten on the fiscal side, but we also have the desire, the government of which I'm a part and the finance minister also have this desire to make sure that, as it were, there are new sources of domestic demand because global demand is so uncertain. And so that is the underlying logic of the macro architecture of the budget, I would say.
Absolutely, sir, and let me compliment you for that wonderful analogy that you gave us. And I'll borrow your word here. You said global headwinds. Now, sir, certainly we are living in very, very uncertain era. There's this fear of another onslaught of the pandemic. We're seeing the Ukraine-Russia war. We're seeing the fuel prices, the surge in the fuel prices. In such a scenario, given the geopolitical situation, do you think the budget has provided cushion to the economy against these global headwinds?
The cushions, I think, were built up sensibly in the past. We may not have been aware of them, but they were there. Very importantly, the build-up of foreign exchange reserves is a cushion. Very importantly, the whole acceptance of a flexible exchange rate. Yes, we may have used foreign exchange reserves in order to smoothen volatility, but a flexible exchange rate, because it's gone from the late 70s to about 81, 82 to the dollar. That is a buffer. Of course, our holdings of food stocks, which is something that, frankly, India tends to get criticized for in terms of distorting global markets. That is what allowed 800 million people, 80 crore people, to get free rations. So that was a buffer as well. So all of these were, as it were, rainy day funds that actually were available when this double cataclysm of COVID and the Ukraine war hit India. But to continue the logic of what I've said, we believe that the past COVID has been now overcome, which is not to say that we won't be subjected to future pandemics, and that we need to rebuild those buffers again, because the world economy remains turbulent. And a very important part of that is credibility, but it's also literally having what economists call fiscal space.
That's right.
Okay? And fiscal space can be measured in a number of ways. It can be measured in terms of the fiscal deficit. It can be measured in the debt GDP ratio. The 4.5% of GDP that we are aiming for is something that came out of a review of something called the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, designed to put India's debt GDP ratio, and here by debt I don't mean foreign debt. By debt, I mean domestic debt, okay, debt GDP ratio. But in all of this, and to come back to your first question, in some ways, and in lots of ways, rapid growth is itself a form of protection.
That's right.
For a number of reasons. Of course, it's important politically and for political support, but also I talked about the debt GDP ratio, and it's like the blades of a scissor. You can be, as it were, getting to your target debt GDP ratio by reducing debt, but also by working on the denominator. And so therefore, and also a fast-growing economy also attracts foreign investment, foreign financing, domestic investment. So to shift from the image of a ship to the image of a bicycle, yes, you can be conservative if you're just learning, but you may fall off. Similarly, you might cycle so fast without a helmet that you topple over. But, in order to get to your destination, you have to pedal at a certain pace. And I think that is the sweet spot that the Honourable Finance Minister has aimed for and hopefully will achieve.
Absolutely, sir. I'd also like to talk about the sector, and particularly the agriculture sector. Now, big announcement that came was about the digital public infrastructure for the agriculture sector. The credit also, that has also been enhanced for the agriculture sector. Particular focus was given on the agri startups. What does that mean for the agriculture sector in our country?
Well, agriculture is very important economically and politically. There's no question about that. Point number one. Point number two, and here we have very experienced colleagues of mine, member agriculture, and what I'm going to say is really on the basis of guidance that I've received from him. Indian agriculture has actually performed quite well in terms of output, but there are challenges in terms of, I would say, productivity, but most of all, as it were, the cropping pattern. We have gotten, we've not been, for political reasons largely, we've not been able to shift in the way that consumer demand has shifted, which has been away from cereals, which have a terrific supporting infrastructure, government, MSP, procurement, all of that, and that provides, safety and security to farmers who plant, because they know what they're going to get. But the demand has moved to horticulture, the demand has moved to animal husbandry, dairy, and all of this. Okay. Now, all of this requires marketing, it requires innovation. You didn't actually mention cooperatives. So
Yes.
the idea really is that the talent and innovation that we are seeing in many other sectors could now be applied to an agriculture which is already proving its worth, but in such areas as what is called extension, adapting the particular seed varieties to particular climatic zones, tuning the irrigation and the fertilizer to the particular location. Because we are a large country, most people don't know that we have the largest farming land, what they call arable land, in the world.
Yes.
Okay. So I think the broad point is that a big shift to higher yielding crops or higher yielding output, not crops, is possible. Much of it is going to have to come from India, from within India, because given the scale of our population, it's all going to be domestically produced. But that joining demand and supply is going to require innovation, digitization, and new marketing sort of structures, particularly cooperatives. And that was the focus on agriculture as I saw it.
Absolutely, sir. Point very well taken. I'd also like to talk about investment. Now, the government has undivided focus on investment, one would agree. But sir, private investment has remained muted. This budget, do you think it paves way for crowding in private investment as we move ahead?
The answer is yes, through multiple channels. But as they say, Rome was not built in a day.
Very true.
And here again, I think the insights of the economic survey are correct and pertinent. And what are those insights? Those insights are that there is such a thing as a financial cycle, which is sort of boom and bust, okay? And since I was the Director General of NCAR, I've kind of lived through this, so it resonates with me. So there was a boom in the first decade of the century, and this is of the 21st century, and in the economic survey, this is represented by a very rapid rise in the credit to GDP ratio.
That's right.
Now, what we know is, so two things happened. One is that in general, when credit grows too fast, you tend to find, froth. You tend to find people have overextended themselves. But second, and I remember what the discussion was at that time. At that time, people thought, China's done it, why can't India do it?
That's right.
So there was, a genuine investment boom in the private sector.
Right.
But that bubble got punctured by the global financial crisis, and the argument in the economic survey, which I think is warranted, is that the global financial crisis and COVID and now the war has meant that it has taken a decade for those excesses to have purged themselves, not only in the balance sheets of corporations, the private sector, but equally in the balance sheets of banks. And this has been particularly facilitated by a courageous initiative of this government, the bankruptcy code. So where we are actually after the 2 years of COVID is not where I would have expected to be. We are in a situation where the banking system is willing to lend in a way that it really was not in the period before COVID, and we also had the NBFC crisis. Okay. So a lot of the things that were holding back corporate investment, I think, have now been fixed.
Right.
There still remains, though, the issue of demand and capacity utilization, and that is where the focus on the government, as it were, stimulating demand, not by handouts, but by creating infrastructure assets and various kinds of knowledge assets as well, like digital public goods. I think the hope and the expectation, and it's a reasonable expectation, is that by even in the face of global headwinds, might reawake animal spirits. And certainly, the valuation of Indian companies in the stock markets has anticipated to some extent that they will add to capacity in due course. It's not quite the question you asked me, but let me also point to something that I think is quite important in the budget, but which hasn't got, to my knowledge, that much attention, which is that at various points in the budget, there are now opportunities for the private sector, say pharma, to benefit from public research laboratories for them to support R&D for themselves. Because up till now we've had this paradox that multinationals have come to India, to Bangalore, to Noida, etc., to set up their own research and development centers, while the spending on research and development by Indian corporates remains frankly pitifully low. Okay? And so I think as part of this long-term journey to India as a knowledge and skill driven economy by the time it is a developed economy, that is another, if you like, seed that has been planted in this budget.
Very imperative point you made there, sir. And since you were also talking about demand, I'd like to add another point, which is giving more money in the hands of the employers with the taxation change that we saw. That would also create effective demand, sir?
Yes, but I think more important actually is and it's very imaginative. I mean, I've been privileged, to hear some of the thoughts of Honorable PM in this area, so it doesn't come as a complete surprise. But even the speech mentioned the aspirational districts program.
That's right.
It mentioned a new aspirational blocks program, and for both these initiatives, this organization that I'm privileged to lead, NITI Aayog, is nodal.
That's right.
Now, what is the insight behind both these programs, and how is that insight reflected in the budget? The insight is that is actually an insight of radical decentralization, even though in press commentary the accusation is that this is a very centralized government. That's not the sense that I've picked up.
All right.
So now there were two programs that I thought were very imaginative and indeed compassionate. Three actually. One was this initiative to help self-help groups come together and to support them with more modern marketing,
right.
Linking up with another initiative which the Honorable Prime Minister is associated with, one district, one product. So that's one initiative that found its way into the budget. The second initiative was this Vishwakarma initiative,
right.
where similarly the focus is on supporting craftspersons.
That's right.
Okay. And that is in turn linked up with this idea of unity malls in various metros. And it's all part of a sense that India has wonders within.
That's right.
And that technology and organization, more than money, or as much, more than money actually, can, as it were, deliver or can help the transition from traditional to more modern forms of output. And I can, I mean, I'm interested in these things, and I can say that even to this day, Indian design, Indian textiles, I mean, these are influential in the rest of the world, I mean, French designers, Italian designers. So those skills are there. And a country I often, compare ourselves with is Italy.
Okay.
And we are, in terms of per capita income, at the sort of level that Italy was in the 1950s. Okay? And so I don't know what Italy was like in the 1950s in terms of crafts, but it is from those crafts traditions that today you have, a Gucci, or you have,
Absolutely.
A Giorgio Armani. So we have those skills, and those skills are actually being used by the international fashion industry. The point is that, look, why is it that we cannot develop that supply chain and that pride in our own crafts when the world sees it in us? So I think that there is that kind of aspiration. And 25 years, we may have our own, as it were, equivalent of these craft centers that you have dotted around the Milan, etc. So, I mean, I think these are imaginative starts to a long journey, but one that recognizes the value within. And I think that struck me almost moving in the budget, that all of this fineness within was being acknowledged and recognized and developed in various ways. Let me add to that, yes, as it were, the program to assist tribals, because right, they are another, yeah, group, vulnerable tribals who have a way of life that they wish to protect, but that as Indian citizens, that doesn't mean that they are not eligible for the services the rest of us, that's true, take for granted. So I would say that while there was a lot of stuff on big programs and stuff, that to me, this is what gave the budget what I might call heart. I mean, because there was the sense of Sabka Vikas that found a positive expression in the budget.
Well, absolutely, sir. On that sanguine and a very positive note, thank you so much for joining us and giving us that perspective.
Well, I'm very honored and privileged, and thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, sir. Well, viewers, that's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Sansad TV. Goodbye for now from my side.